Have you here? Oh, great. Okay. Is it too loud? Whew. Okay, no stress, right? That's what this whole thing is about. Oh my goodness. Okay. Yes. So it works the first 4 times, but doesn't the last one. Here we go. So are you all back? Is there anybody brand new to this particular session, or are you all back? Okay. I think I recognize all these names. So thank you for coming back. This is our 4th and final workshop for this particular series. There will be more, but right now this is kind of the 4th of 4. So again, before we get started, you know the drill, but I have to say it because it's being recorded. The presentations you're about to view is intellectual property of the Department of National Defense. Any reproduction or retransmission of the slides contained in this presentation is strictly forbidden. Some of the topics discussed in this webinar may be of sensitive nature and not appropriate for children, so we ask for parental discretion. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing later on cafconnection.ca. Though active participation is encouraged, you may simply follow along without using the chat or video. Again, because it's being recorded, I need to ask you this question one more time. Share now. And here we go. So what is your affiliation with the CAF community? I think we lost 2 people. Okay, perfect. Okay, so going back to the chat. Hope everybody's back. That's perfect. So today we're going to talk again. We'll always do a review from last week just to kind of go over the stuff that we learned already. The end actually is going to be a review of all 4 sessions that we've already seen. What we are going to be talking about, the topic for today is forgiveness and letting go. Then we're going to talk about lapse and relapse and going back to our sort of former behavior, and then how to prevent relapse. And then we are open to questions because we've got lots of time to go over that sort of thing. So last week we talked about avoidance and escape strategies, right? And we know that they can be employed to reduce the tension created in dealing with anger generating situations. But remembering that they're not a permanent solution, because we know that anger is a problem that needs to be solved. If we can avoid them or escape them, we know that we won't get angry, or we'll have time to sort of manage the emotion before sort of entering the situation. But it's not a fix, right? But they're also very effective in preventing further damage to relationships, personal or professional. Have any of you tried any of these avoidance or escape strategies over the last week? And how did they go? If you want to put that in the chat, that'd be really great. Sometimes it's a great way even just to try it out, because it almost lightens the situation as a general rule. So if you kind of go back and you think, oh, okay, well, that's how I did it, or this is what I'm going to do next time, then that's always a great way to get started on a situation that you don't want to make worse. So when we talked about those avoidance and escape strategies, these were the different strategies that we discussed. So we talked about planned avoidance. So remember the example of that the lady who was in my class who decided that, she wasn't going to go to her Thanksgiving dinner because she just couldn't stand one of the family members. So she planned to avoid that situation, because every year, without a doubt, it would cause her a lot of distress. So that was one of those things that they can call as a planned avoidance. Or if you plan to be away when a family member comes to visit, or one of your coworkers is at work a lot, you can plan to be there earlier or later to sort of spend less time with that person. Avoidance by time delays, right? You get a phone call or an email or a text, and you actually take the time, you maybe write it out a couple of times. Sometimes we say write an email and then send it the next day after you've gone over it, or have somebody else read it. Or like I said, my husband always says, well, let me ask my wife. And that usually gives him some time to think about it, or lets me make that decision, which is great. Avoidance by seeking another method of responding, right? So if somebody talks to you, or if you're in a situation where you get a phone call, maybe you can say, well, leave that information with me. And then again, writing it out, or having an email, putting it in a letter. Like I said, my mom used to write me a letter about why she was upset with me. And so she would not say it verbally, because sometimes you might forget some of the things you want to say, or it comes out wrong. And maybe she put it in words so that she knew that everything that she wanted to say would be there. Okay? So those would be the avoidance ones. The escape would be the planned escape. So again, if you're on a blind date and you have a friend call you 45 minutes into it, or you're meeting up with somebody that you don't like much, and know that if I say, well, hey, let's meet up at 10 o'clock, but know that you have an important phone call at 11:45, then knowing that you can say, well, it was great talking to you, but I have this work commitment that I need to do, whatever, at this time. So that's always a planned escape. You can leave there a little bit earlier. Distraction. I'm saying distraction could be when sometimes situations are heated and they're not going anywhere. You can, clap your hands, or say something like hippopotamus. Like my friend says, when things are heated at home, she just yells out hippopotamus, or stops everything and throws her arms around her daughter and hugs her, as opposed to continue the yelling, because it diffuses the situation. Or just taking a timeout. We said timeouts could be things like, you plan ahead of time and say, when things are heated between two people, typically somebody that you argue with often, or that, somebody you don't want a relationship to be destroyed or be put into any type of, negative spin. You can say, well, when we stop listening to each other, or when things start getting heated, I'm going to do this particular sign. Maybe put your hands in a T and say, I'm planning a timeout. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to, I'm going to just take a few breaths to relax. I'll be back in 20 minutes. Because remembering those timeouts are really important to remember, that that's not, again, it's not a fix. The time back in, though, is. So when you schedule a timeout, there's always a time in, because when you take a timeout, it's not to ruminate or to plan revenge. It is to come up with a solution, or to calm down so that the blood can come back to your brain and you can make more rational decisions, as opposed to reacting. So those are avoidance and escape strategies. So that is that. Any questions with those? Or did anybody have any trouble, or was able to use any of those? All right, so let's get into our workshop. I'm going to ask you a question. What do you know about forgiveness? If I say forgiveness, what comes to mind, or what kinds of things have you learned or were taught about forgiveness? This is really where we need some interaction here. What is forgiveness to you? Sometimes people have different views on forgiveness, and it can make, certain situations more challenging, especially if you have certain conceived notions about forgiveness and the other person has other conceived notions. So forgiveness is something that is I guess it's an inner thought. It's part of how you were brought up, or your morals, or your values, or maybe something that you've done some work on. But forgiveness, there's sort of things that people think, like myths, for example, and then there's what forgiveness really is. So let's go into that. So 5 myths about forgiveness. So this is something that much easier if there is some understanding of why the other person did it or said it. Yes, right? Sometimes we don't understand, and that's why we hold on to it, right? Because we're trying to make sense of it. And that can actually be really, really difficult, right? Especially when the other person isn't involved in explaining it to you. So very, very important, right? So 5 myths about forgiveness. And this is sometimes things that we actually believe about forgiveness. So one of them, so again, 5 myths about forgiveness, what forgiveness is not. Sometimes people think forgiving is the same as forgetting. Okay. Now, most of us know that we can't necessarily forget something that was done to us, right? It's there, it's part of our memories. So sometimes we think, well, we've finally forgiven once we've forgotten. So forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. The next one, forgiving is the same as excusing. So we think that if we forgive somebody, we accept that what they did was okay, right? Same thing as excusing. Well, we have to remember and we have to know that it is not the same. Okay, forgiveness is not the same as excusing. It is a very, very different concept. But sometimes we get stuck and we don't forgive because we feel like if we do, we're making what they did okay. Okay, and that makes us stuck. The next one is forgiving is the same as reconciling. Will I forgive that person? Will I have to be their friend again? Or will I have to let them back into my life? So sometimes that's a huge block when it comes to forgiving somebody, because forgiving somebody does not mean that you need to let them back into your life. That's really, really important. Okay. So another myth, again, forgiving is the same as reconciling. Okay. So be very, very aware that it does not mean that. Forgiving makes you weak, right? When I work with a lot of military members and we think, and some of them will think, if I forgive somebody, it shows that I'm weak, that I'm sort of backing down or I'm taking a step back. So that is, again, a myth when we talk about forgiveness and what it actually is. Forgiveness doesn't make you weak. If it's not an excuse for forgiving, no incentive for forgiving, then how? We are going to go into excusing or forgiving and how to do it, I promise. Okay, that's really what this presentation is about. So thank you for that question. We will go into that, I promise. Okay, so forgiving makes you weak, making sure that you know that for some people they think that, and knowing that the other person that you are forgiving doesn't even need to know that you're doing it, which is something also that's really important. So the last one is forgiving depends on the other person acknowledging the wrongful behavior. So for some, forgiveness only happens when someone asks you for their forgiveness. So forgiving only if they ask for it, or only if they ask you to forgive them. And sometimes what's unfortunate is that for some people who believe this strongly, and then the other person either passes away or leaves their life completely, or also doesn't think that they did something wrong, they're never going to hear that apology. So this is kind of where, when we think about, when I asked you what you thought about forgiveness, if any of these came up, those might have been what you thought for forgiveness was. And maybe that's why for some of you, you're holding on to certain concepts, you're holding on to certain hurts. Okay? So we're going to talk about what forgiveness is, because this is what forgiveness is not. Okay. So now that we talked about that slide, what is forgiveness? What do you think forgiveness is now? What is forgiveness if those 5 things were not forgiveness? Any ideas? I feel like there's a delay in the chat. I don't know. Maybe it's just my computer. But it's interesting to sort of have that sort of back and forth what you think forgiveness is, because it is very individual. Forgiveness is a concept for sure that we all have different. There's a lot left, let me tell you then. Okay, so forgiveness is a non-verbal concept. Okay, so it has nothing to do with talking to the other person. Forgiveness is a non-verbal concept, and it's an emotional experience. This is something that you do internally. Okay, forgiveness is an internal state. This is where forgiveness is almost, if you think about the thing that you're looking for forgiveness for, it's almost like, think of it as like a box, and you're holding on to that box, and it's a box of hurt. So when we talk about forgiveness, we're going to decide internally, emotionally, that we're going to get rid of that box. We're going to let that box go. So when you look at the fourth point, it involves a process of dissolving feelings of anger, resentment, or hatred towards an individual. So the Oxford Dictionary says to cease resenting and wanting to punish an offense, flaw, or mistake, okay, of another person. So forgiveness has nothing to do with the other person asking for forgiveness or even being involved in the process. So we decide to take that box and to put it aside, to let it go, to dissolve. Someone asks you for your forgiveness and you go through an internal state. Isn't the situation left in the air? The situation depends on how you feel about it. Let me go to the next slide. Maybe that will help. Okay. So this is where, when we talk about forgiveness, it involves one person, and it is you. So if someone asks for your forgiveness, you can choose to give it or not to give it verbally. Not giving someone else forgiveness means that you're holding on to the pain. You're holding on to the hurt. And as much as that's an easy thing to say, remember when we talked about perception, or when we talked about the personal power grid, where you decide to hold on to something or not to hold on to something. Can we change things? We can't change the past. Can we change other people? No, we can't change other people. So when we talk about forgiveness, this is part of that mastery quadrant, the acceptance quadrant. Okay, when we talked about those two positive things, forgiveness in the mastery quadrant would be you're choosing. Okay, it's an act you're willing to enter into the process of change. It's a choice. Forgiving somebody is a choice. And forgiveness is peace of mind. It's letting go. We can't change what happened. We can't change the person. We can't change the situation. But we can change how we let it affect our lives. We can change how we choose to view it, how we choose to hold on to it. Okay. If this box is sitting on your chest and it feels like a big pressure, and you let that affect all of the rest of your relationships or affect how you choose to present yourself, right? This box is going to be there. So forgiveness involves one person, and it's a choice of letting that go. Okay, so forgiveness means we will be less emotionally reactive in relation to someone who has hurt us. It can be difficult and it can take time. Forgiveness isn't something that you do and you snap your fingers and it goes away. Okay, forgiveness, and we're going to talk about how to go into that process, but it's a process, but it is one of those things that you choose to do because it no longer serves you, right? It doesn't make the quality of your life any better when you hold on to this box, and it doesn't have to change the relationship with that person because they don't ever need to know that you have let go. So this is what forgiveness is. Okay, it's a process, it's a choice, it's a letting go. It's kind of like letting go of those expectations. We talked about expectations in one of our workshops. And again, it's that I have to stop expecting something that someone else will never do or will never change, because I can't change other people and they don't know what's going on in my head. So I have to just let them be who they are and change my response to it, because it only affects me physically, emotionally, physiologically, those kinds of things. So forgiveness is not something we do for other people. It's something we do for ourselves. This is something that we do to lift up or lift off that box of hurt that's sitting on our chest, and it removes it from moving forward. Okay, because it's almost like it's a ball and chain. It drags with you, and the other person might not even know that they've done something wrong. And what's interesting is one of my participants, and I like giving stories because it kind of makes some things real, is she decided that she was never ever going to forgive her mother, ever. And she said, you know what, I was waiting for an apology, and that's the only way I'm going to let it go. But her mother had passed away, and so she's decided that she'll be holding on to that hurt regardless. But it's never going to get better because she's never going to hear the apology. Her mom no longer lives. So this is kind of where, is it worth holding on to? And does does the person even think that they've done something wrong, right? Yeah, forgot and forgive are two very different things. Forgot just means that you kind of buried it really, really deep and you don't have it in the reset in your forefront of your mind. But it's that it can stay, and it becomes sort of part of your thought process, or it becomes part of your person. There was another participant who was in our anger management class, and she said she'd been holding on to this particular anger situation for years. It was about 5 years, and she said she used to love entertaining. She was a happy person and all this stuff. And then her friend did something, and she said she's been holding on to it forever and she can't let it go. But now she's physically unwell. She's got psychological issues. She hasn't entertained. Her house is now cluttered. It really, really created a huge, huge issue. The problem is when you're sort of, I'm reading here, if you think you can't change a person or situation and work on yourself, it's sort of like giving up hope or having any control or even influence on situations in your life, almost like becoming complacent or giving up hope for anything to get better. See, the problem is, though, is that when you hope that someone else will change, you're going to be disappointed all the time. And this is kind of where that change of mindset has to happen. And this is not something that's easy, but if you're hoping that someone else will change or that a situation will change, not that I'm going to say it never will, but it can't, because you can't control that other person. They will never be exactly what you imagine or what you need them to be, because they're not you, because they are who they are. And if this situation or this person is the way they are and have always been that way, then that's who they are. So your job is to say, is this worth holding on to? Is this worth me being upset over something that I can't change? So giving up expectation doesn't mean giving up hope. Hope is always about what you can do or how you can feel. Hope is not, I hope someone else will change, because that's not, I'm not going to say that's not fair to them, but they can't, and they never will, unless you say this specific thing, something makes me angry or something that really hurts me. If this doesn't change, then you can't be with that person anymore, or be with, in the life with that person anymore, because they don't want to change and they don't want to make you sort of less unhappy. Then that's a choice that they make, but you have to choose whether or not you're okay to live with that. So like I said, when I was talking about the personal power grid, is I had to give up all expectation of ever being number one when it came to my husband coming home on time from work or not. And that was a decade. And was I upset every day? Yes. But did I have to let that go? Yes, because it was affecting me. I can't expect. So my expectation, what I did was I increased it by an hour. Or I have to let go of the expectation of, I have a son with ADHD, the expectation that he will ever want to read with me. So it's almost like they're not going to be different for you. They're going to be different for them if they choose to be different. But how you see it, whether you're seeing it as an attack or you're seeing it as it's very difficult. We're not becoming complacent. We're just choosing to put energy in things that we have control over. So, again, when you're choosing, am I happy or not? What kinds of things are you doing for your own happiness? Are you depending on other people for your happiness? Because that will never be, right? You have to choose to make yourself happy and then work from there, right? When we look at that mastery quadrant, that's where we can't be complacent. That's that giving up quadrant. Does that make sense? I know it's not easy, and sometimes you can't really visualize it or see it or understand how that could be, but accepting how someone else is makes the relationship easier because you know that they're not going to change. So expecting them to is going to leave you disappointed. Okay, it's not going to affect them. Anyways, it's I could go on and on, but let's try to continue on, see if this makes a little bit more sense. Okay, so exactly, resentment is the opposite of forgiveness. Okay? Anger and ill will in view of real or imagined wrong. So when we have resentment, we're holding on to, again, expectations. We're holding on to things that we would have liked or that we would have done. Sometimes once we've gone through, yes, I'm just reading sort of, when we're an extrovert, we don't rely on others to be happy, but we get energy from being with others, as long as the others that we're with give us positive energy. When we're with a group of people who give us negative energy, I'm an extrovert as well, and it's very, very challenging to decide that it's okay to walk away from that particular group. So choosing whether or not the energy that you're getting is positive or negative, or choosing to sort of put a wall up within your own happiness and be like, well, if they're not happy, then that's their problem. I feel sorry for them, but it can't affect me, right? If you're happy with how you're doing things again. So there should be sound. Does everybody else hear me? Are you guys okay? Heather, can you not hear me? No sound again. Okay. Okay, perfect. So hopefully you can at least see the slides, Heather. So, so I don't know. I'm just gonna type to Heather that sometimes she has to. Oh, you're back. Okay, perfect. So sometimes there is like a pause because of the Wi-Fi, but just I'll be back in a few seconds. So when we look at resentment, okay, anger, ill will in view of real or imagined wrong. Sometimes the imagined wrong is we think that they're doing it on purpose to attack us or to hurt us, but they're not. They just have different priorities, right? And that's sometimes really hard to understand. When we talk about resentment of people leaving, being messy in our house when we need things to be right or when we need things to be clean, we're resenting them for not keeping things clean, or we feel like we're being undermined because they're always being messy. But they're not doing it on purpose to hurt you. They're doing it because they have other priorities. And or maybe they don't think that is part of their responsibilities or something like that. But resentment often comes with disappointment and over again. But it's also how we view the situation, right? When I gave you that example, my husband was upstairs and I'm say, hey, can you please bring down my blue shirt? And then when he comes down, he doesn't bring down the blue shirt. So I can view that as an imagined wrong, and I can feel, resentment or hurt. Hey, he never listens to me. He always does this. He doesn't care if I'm late. But that's an imagined wrong, right? He didn't actually hear me. So when we look at how we view situations, we have to sometimes stop and think, what story am I telling myself in my head? Is that person doing it on purpose to piss me off? Or are they doing it because they don't know any better, or because they have different priorities? Remember those coping thoughts that we looked at 2 weeks ago? We're going to look at those when we talk about what are some of the things we can do to let go of some of the anger. Sometimes it's really just coping thought. Is this worth getting angry over? So let's kind of move on, because sometimes we just need to be heard when you don't bring down the blue shirt. Well, the expectation is that he brings down the blue shirt, but if he doesn't, because he doesn't hear you, he's not doing it to hurt you. He's doing it because he doesn't hear you. He didn't know that he was supposed to do it in the first place. So when you're having a conversation with somebody and you tell them exactly what you need or what you feel, it's really important to say, what did you hear me say? Because sometimes you'd be very surprised at how opposite they heard you say, even though you used the right words. Okay. I did a workshop on anger and communication that I'll probably be bringing back a little bit later on, but the expectation when we have other people and we know they know exactly what we need, because if he's upstairs and I'm saying, hey, can you bring down my blue shirt? Hey, did you hear me? Perfect. So, he calls down and he says, yes, then you can have the expectation, but how many blue shirts do you have? What if you have 3 blue shirts and he brings down the wrong one, right? Again, it's an expectation. You're like, oh, not that one. But how is he supposed to know? I don't know if that makes sense with what you're talking about, but we can have an expectation only if they know exactly what we need at exactly the right time, at exactly, the right pit. Like there's so many things that we have to think about when we have expectations, right? It's like when we think, well, people just know what respect should be. Well, no, they don't, because everybody has respect in different ways or was brought up differently. These are all things that when we look at expectations, we expect people to be like us, and we expect people to have ethic like us, and we expect people to have the same priorities as us, especially if we're living together. And I'm telling you, for 18 years, I've been with the same person and they still don't know. Does that make sense? The same as no. Does that make sense? Is the same as did you hear me? What did you hear me say? Is not the same thing at all, because it makes sense to them how they heard it. But when they repeat what they heard you say, for them it might mean, so you wanted the blue tank top. But you're like, no, the blue shirt. Shirts have sleeves. Well, how do they know that? Guys don't know that. So it's very different to say, does that make sense? And what did you hear me say? Very, very different. Does that make sense, Rhonda? What did you hear me say? No, that does not make sense. It's very interesting, but give it a try one day when you're explaining something to somebody and you say, I just, out of curiosity, what are you hearing me say? And just be ready to be either pleased or very surprised, right? It's a very interesting concept. Holy cow. It can really knock you off your feet. It's very interesting. So moving into the slides is when we hold on to grudges. It brings bitterness and anger into relationships and new expectations. So we sort of bring those old hurts into new relationships and sometimes place those negative expectations on other people. It takes away enjoyment of the present. When we hold on to grudges, resentment, when we hold on to, past hurts that we're sort of bringing with us, sometimes it takes away from enjoyment in the present moment. When you think about, when you're disappointed in somebody or when your expectations are unmet, we get disappointed and we hold on to that. And sometimes that could last days, weeks, years. It really, really affects our emotions, our enjoyment of our lives. And so it can bring on depression or anxiousness or health issues, whether they're mental health issues or physiological health issues because of the stress that it causes. And we lose valuable, enriching connections with others, and it prevents progression. When we hold on to past things and we bring them into the next part of our lives, we bring them into every day of our life, and when we bring them into next relationships, we bring in that hurt with us, or we bring in those negative expectations, or the thought that, well, is everybody like that? So again, one of those things that we do is we're bringing those extra boxes, right? We talk about that, we call it baggage. We bring the baggage with us, and everybody has baggage. Yes, absolutely, and that's totally okay. But how much or how long do you hold on to it can affect, the rest of your life or the next connections you want to make. Because if you choose to let go of the relationship that hurt you, well, when we go into the next relationship, do we go in with sort of half our heart because the other half has sort of been, is holding on to this big box, right? So just holding on to grudges can be something that can cause a lot of discomfort or pain or unhappiness in our next life or next situations. So the benefits of forgiving: healthier relationships, greater psychological well-being, okay, less stress and hostility, lower blood pressure because of all the different physiological changes, right? When we have a lot of stress in our lives, there's a lot of physiological damage that can stay. Fewer symptoms of depression, anxiety, and chronic pain, and lower risk of alcohol and substance abuse. Sometimes when we hold on to something that causes a lot of pain, alcohol and drug abuse usually happen because people want to numb that pain. So when we talk about alcoholics or when we talk about people who have addictions, they're not morally weak, they are hurt, and their substance is numbing that hurt and making that hurt feel different, or so they can forget because they haven't forgiven or let go of. Okay, so some things are very hard to let go of and very hurtful, but this is why when we talk about any type of addiction, even when we talk about gaming addictions or any type of escape addictions, it's usually because they're trying to mask or numb a hurt that they're holding on to. Okay, so benefits of forgiving are great. When we look at, the next relations that they're going to, our current relationships are better, and we're not holding on to this box of hurt in our heart. So life becomes easier when you learn to accept an apology you never got, right? Just like my friend who lost her mother, who she said she will never forgive until she got a forgiveness or an apology, but she's never going to let it go because she's never going to get the apology. And this is where you have to sort of think, maybe she didn't know any better. Maybe she didn't have a good upbringing and didn't know how else to be. Maybe she didn't think she was doing anything wrong and was doing her best. And these are all the things that we have to remember, that other people have their own baggage and they're bringing those into relationships and different situations. And so the way they are is how they became because of what happened to them, their experiences, right? When we talked about the mental filter at the very beginning, our perceptions of our life and our perceptions of our situations are all based on our experiences. And so, if someone was hurtful to you, maybe someone was hurtful to them and they don't know how else to be. Maybe they're bringing that box into this particular relationship, right? That baggage, that luggage. And so sometimes just having more empathy or compassion for somebody and saying, maybe they didn't know any better. Maybe they thought they were doing something right. Maybe they didn't know they were doing anything wrong because they either, didn't learn any better, or they were in their own head thinking, well, this is probably okay. I'm doing my best. Then sometimes we just have to be, we can't change it. Maybe they were doing their best and I'm never going to get an apology because they think they were doing it right. But it's not sad because you are looking after yourself. And forgiveness just means that you're not letting that negative experience affect the rest of your life. Not having expectations on others, I feel like, I know that sounds sad because it feels like it doesn't give us hope. But if we see it in a different light, or if we react or act with somebody differently, it changes the relationship. Even with, let's say, with children, right? We can yell at them and get them to listen to us by yelling at them because we want them to do something. Or, they do bad things because they want our attention. Well, we expect them to do exactly what we want when we want it. But they haven't lived that experience yet. They don't know what time is. They don't have the same priorities. Maybe they want to finish something. So our expectations of perfection, our expectations of certain things are maybe not fair on other people. So it's really about communication. And I'm not saying not having expectations, but if you're not communicating them perfectly, exactly, then other people won't know what you want or what you need, or that you were hurt, right? When we are hurt, do we often tell them that we've been hurt, or how we've been hurt, or why we were hurt? Sometimes we don't even have that conversation, and so they'll never know. And will they change it? Who knows, right? You have to also understand, do you do anything that causes hurt to anybody else? Do you even know? And this is kind of where we're going to go through, sometimes we do things that aren't great. And so we need to sometimes ask ourselves for forgiveness and move on to the next stage of our life. I'm really hoping that you're not feeling distraught or distressed in that I'm saying don't have expectations on other people. I'm just saying you need to watch out how they affect you, right? Because they're not you. So when we look at the process of forgiving others, okay, first thing you need to do is decide or declare to yourself your intention to forgive. And you have to stop seeking revenge, retaliation, and to stop allowing the bitterness and anger to take over. So every time we think about that other person, we get angry or we get bitter or we get resentful. Those are feelings or emotions that affect your physiology, your mental health, and those kinds of things. So when we decide to let that go, okay, we can recognize that the hurt, or recognize your hurt or anger. Allow yourself to feel this hurt and acknowledge that a wrong was committed. This is not something that you just be like, it wasn't so bad, or, oh, no problem, that was okay. It wasn't. And forgiveness doesn't mean making what happened okay. It means not letting it affect you, not letting that bitterness run through you. Okay? It's almost like poison. When you think about anger or bitterness or resentment, it's like taking poison and expecting the other person to get hurt or to die. Okay, so that's really sort of a visual. It's that recognizing that you were hurt does not mean that the other person did something okay, but acknowledge how this situation has affected your life, health, and well-being. And then you can choose to end or renew the relationship. And it's basically a letting go of the hurt and not letting it affect the rest of your life. It still happened. This is still part of your past, but it is no longer affecting your happiness. Okay? Finally, letting go of an expectation makes you so much more open and happy with people around you because you're not letting that bitterness affect your relationships. And oftentimes that is what affects relationships. It's the bitterness that we're carrying around, the resentment that we're carrying around on expectations about other people, but they don't know that they are doing them, or they can't change them because that's not who they are. So expecting them to change is almost hurtful because you have to sort of, if you're with somebody, care for most of them, right? But everybody has flaws, like everybody's not perfect. So knowing that, getting along and understanding that everybody's different and has different expectations is really, really important. So process of forgiving others. Forgiveness also means that we change old patterns of beliefs and actions that are driven by our bitterness. Okay, so what patterns have we developed, or what beliefs have we created that we've held on to, right? So every time, for example, my husband says now, I'll be home at this time. In my head now, automatically, I give him an hour and a half, or I even just don't expect him to be home at that time. And my new expectation is he'll probably be an hour late. And so I'm not holding on to the old pattern of he'll be home on time and then be bitter and angry when he's not, which is every day. So it's just one of those things, right? So as we let go of grudges, we'll no longer define our lives by how we've been hurt and we may even find compassionate understanding. Maybe that other person, again, doesn't know or doesn't, won't change or can't change or just doesn't know, again, that they've hurt you or has left your life. Okay, so no longer defining our lives by how we've been hurt. Was my friend who said that her friend did something that angered her so much, but now that's how she lives her life. She lives her life in anger. She won't, have people over because she's so upset about what happened, and this is how she moves on in her life, and so it's affecting her whole thing. So just letting go is actually part of that. Do I need this anymore? Is it serving me? Is it making me a better person? Am I, being able to enjoy the rest of my life? Am I having things in my life that are making me happy? Am I creating my own happiness, or am I depending on somebody else? So these are all very, very important when it comes to letting go of old patterns of belief. We have to believe that other people, have good intentions, but maybe not the right intentions. So we need to choose to do what we can for ourselves. Because sometimes you need to forgive yourself for some of those things, right? So decide to declare your intention to forgive yourself. Sometimes we do things that we're not proud of, or sometimes we do things that were less than ideal. So if you do get upset with your children, or if you do get upset and yell or do something that you regret, sometimes you need to forgive yourself. And I've been through a period of my life where my daughter was a bit more challenging, and I lost my sort of parenting ability, and I would yell back, or I would say something that wasn't as constructive as it could have been. So I would go for a dog walk, and I would clear my head, and I would forgive myself. You know what? I'm going to have a better parenting day today, or, today I was just really tired, and so you know what? I'm going to start again fresh today. And that was something that I had to do on a regular basis because we had a very, very rough year. The next one is acknowledge that your actions and or words hurt the other person, okay, or hurt yourself. And you have to choose to consciously let go of guilt. Sometimes you do things and you did it, right? And you can't change it because it's in the past now. So you can either move on to it and change the pattern, change the belief, give yourself some forgiveness and say, you know what, I did that. Maybe you can ask for forgiveness, or just choose to forgive yourself. And remind yourself that you've made a choice to forgive yourself when the feelings of guilt or regret resurface, right? Every time you go through that scenario again, or every time you worry about your parenting skills or your morals or values or whatever, you have to say, you know what, I let that go. You can write it down and burn it, or bury it, or some people will write it in a diary and say, you know what, now that I'm going to close this page, I've moved on from this. So finding a way to forgive yourself is something that's really important, because we do things, we're not perfect. We shouldn't expect other people to be perfect, and it's okay to do something wrong. You're supposed to, because if you don't learn anything. So really important to remember that you need to forgive yourself, and you need to know that you're a good person, and the intentions maybe were in a different place. So it's okay. And it's important, because then you learn to be a different way. Then you choose to do some coping skills and be a better person for next time. Maybe you needed some more self-care. Maybe you needed a better sleep that night, right? Maybe you need some help. And there's nothing also wrong to asking for help when you know that it's going well, and that is okay. Process of forgiving ourselves is really important, okay? Self-love is so important when it comes to bringing into relationships. A failure is not a loss, it's a gain. You learn, you change, and you grow. And that's really important when it comes to forgiveness of others, forgiveness of yourself, but also if we go into our old habits and our old beliefs, right? So this is when we talk about situations that lead to lapses or relapses. So if I'm talking about lapses or relapses, it's talking about sort of old patterns or old ways of thinking that didn't serve us. What kinds of things, or what are some situations that could lead to lapses or relapses of our old behaviors? So when we look at what are some things that can lead to lapses or relapses, having expectations, yes. Life stressors. Typically when we're under a little bit more stress than normal, we have a little bit less fuse or a little bit less space for emotions. So when we have life stressors is typically when we're less, I guess, patient, and we have lapses or relapses in our old behaviors. If we buy a new home, if we get a pet, and that pet has very expensive vet bills, for example, like my dog, maybe we get a new baby, or maybe we have children, maybe our job is stressful, maybe the weather's bad, maybe we're in debt or traffic clutter, maybe there's a pandemic going on, right? Who knows? Those things happen, apparently. So when there's life stressors, sometimes we go back into old behaviors or old patterns because we're a little bit more stressed. And we're a little bit more stressed, maybe we sleep less. Maybe we're doing things like we change our eating habits, and our eating habits, our sleeping habits. Maybe we forget to do our hobbies. Maybe we're starting or stopping some medications, right? Sometimes when you start a new medication, it could definitely take a drastic hit on your mental health, or the opposite. Right? Maybe there's some interruptions in treatments of sessions, right? Maybe there's a holiday that comes up. Maybe there's grief, right? Maybe there's a death in the family. Absolutely. Maybe there's an emergency. Maybe there's a pandemic, right? Who knows? These things happen. So a lot of the times when these things happen in our life, it's typically when we forget to do the things that make us feel good. It's typically when we forget that it's important to do self-care regardless of what's going on. We have to make things habits so that when things get rough, we still have at least some basic things that we can depend on or rely on. And life is not always going to be great. We are going to have ups and downs, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that your life is bad or that your life is good. It just means that it is what it is. How you see it or what you do about it in that mastery quadrant is how you're going to make it better, how you're going to be able to change it. So when all of these things or any of these things happen, right, there's a possibility for lapse or relapse. So a lapse is a short-term single event, right? A thought, a belief, thinking error, sensation or emotion that is part of our anger cycle and relapse pattern. So when we have, what we talked about, the anger mountain, if we forget to take a time out before we have a crisis, or we say something or do something that we regret that we used to do that was part of our old pattern, then maybe that's a lapse. Okay, oops, it's a one-time thing. Oops, okay, I made a mistake. I got to go back to doing what I was doing before I had this lapse, right? It's like smoking. When you quit smoking, or when you quit drinking, or when you quit doing something bad, right? And you do it again, and it's so easy to go back. But that's a lapse. If you just do it once and you stop, that's a lapse. But a relapse is a longer term. So you do that multiple times. You're back to old patterns of behavior. Now, everyone lapses, but not everyone relapses. So catch yourself at the lapse stage to avoid a relapse. And remember that when you have a lapse, they're not failures, but they can be valuable learning experiences. Why did this lapse happen? What was happening in my life at this time? What did I forget to do? Was I tired? Did I eat properly? So when we're looking at the next thing is, what are some relapse prevention things that I can do? These are going to be some of the things that we went through over the first 4 weeks. So first of all is know your early warning signs. What are your warning signs when it comes to, going into old patterns? Analyze the source of your anger. If you have a trigger, if you have an anger moment, stop and think about it. What was it about the situation that triggered me? Was it anger? Was it grief? Was it disappointment? Was it frustration? Those kinds of things. Now break the cycle of your anger and aggressive behavior. Take a time out, right? Maybe you just need a break. Maybe you just need to step away from this particular relationship or particular discussion so that you can prevent it from getting worse. The next one could be catch your thinking errors. Remember our thinking errors. We didn't spend a lot of time on thinking errors because it could be, a whole presentation on its own. But a thinking error is when we do things like exaggerate. So when somebody doesn't do something and you say, you never do that, or you always do that, that's a thinking error. Or when we personalize it, oh, they must have done it to piss me off, or they must have done it to hurt me. Personalizing things is also a thinking error because it typically isn't what it is. A thinking error could also be categorizing things. All people are like this. All of you people do this. All of these people do this. And so it's a thinking error. Okay, so just watch those. Another one could be view your anger generating situation as a problem that needs to be solved, right? Remembering that, stopping and thinking about what is it about this that makes me upset. Mentally and behaviorally rehearse handling difficult situations. So if it's a situation that comes up on a regular basis, if it's something that you get affected by on a regular basis. Oh. Sorry, I'm back. Remembering that sometimes you need to practice saying something or doing something so that the pattern doesn't develop again. So that's some of the things that we can do. Some of the other things we can do when we talk about brainstorm. What are some coping strategies that we could do to prevent an anger generating situation? Just if we were brainstorming, out of the 3 weeks that we just sort of come through, what have you done as a coping strategy so far that has helped over the, or sort of what did you use as one of the techniques that we went through over the last 3 weeks that might have helped with an anger generating situation? Or maybe have you had less because of some of the ways that you've thought about it differently? I really hope that you'll be taking some of these away with you, but anyways, keep calm and use coping skills. I like that one. So one of them could be recognize and acknowledge that this is an anger generating situation and it's a problem that needs to be solved. So not choosing it to see it as anger. Remember, perceiving it. Oh, what can I fix about this? The next one is remember self-care and stress management. Very, very important. If you don't do any of that stuff, then emotionally, anger is going to be at the top of your emotional sort of scale, right? So making sure you're doing some deep breathing or some meditation, maybe try some mindfulness. Have you been sleeping well or eating well? Being active, listen to music, yoga, spend time with friends. Find something that you do for self-care and make it a priority, right? Do it regularly. Sometimes a coping strategy could be just asking yourself, halt. And HALT is one of my favorite acronyms. Why am I getting angry right now? Am I hungry? That's typically the first thing I ask myself. The next one is, am I angry? Am I already feeling emotionally heightened, right? Am I feeling lonely? Sometimes feeling like you have no one to turn to, or when you feel like you feel alone, you have no resources, that can also cause a lot of distress. Okay? Or am I tired? If I haven't been sleeping well, very little sort of thought process because we're tired. We don't have the time or energy to spend on taking a deep breath and taking a step back. So sometimes these are important. I'm going to read this. I find that listening to you has helped me try to accept that I have to realize I can't change everything, to try and accept that sometimes I just have to be more empathic. It's important, and that it's important to be heard. Sometimes strategies me with is making sure that I connect with friends during the pandemic. I am so happy, Heather. That really, really makes me happy. I just got goosebumps because it is very important that we do our best, but we can't, do our best for everybody else all the time. So I'm really, really glad that you're going to reach out to friends because that's really important. So the next one actually is manage your perceptions, right? We talked about perceptions at the very beginning. What story am I telling myself? How am I seeing the situation, right? Am I perceiving when my husband comes down without the shirt that, he's doing it on purpose to piss me off? Am I perceiving that my kids are purposely, trying to misbehave when they don't do something I ask them to? Because I know that that's absolutely not true, but that might be the story that I'm telling myself. Are they disrespecting me? And that might just make my anger go right up there. How am I seeing the situation? Remember, I've been teaching a lot of workshops recently, and I can't remember if I told you this, but one of my participants, all of his perception was that they're doing it on purpose to piss me off. Everything from people cutting him off in traffic, from people who are in the grocery store counting pennies. Like this poor gentleman would feel like, his story is that they're doing it on purpose to piss me off, but in reality, they didn't even acknowledge that he was there, right? So finally, he said, well, they're not doing it on purpose to piss me off. So he changed his story in his head, and sometimes that's all you need to do. Coping strategies, use my coping thoughts, my new coping thoughts. And a coping thought could be, Heather, exactly, is I have to accept that some people just are not going to, be who I expect them to be, or I can't change anything, or what can I do to change in the situation? And this is probably my favorite one is, what can I do in this situation? What coping thought can I use? Halt. Am I hungry? That's the first thing I ask myself. I don't know if any of you have ever felt hangry, but that's usually the first thing that happens to me when I'm feeling frustrated. The next one is use your personal power grid, right? Mastery and acceptance. What can I do to change the situation? And it's really sometimes is, how can I change myself in the situation? What do I have control over? Or what can I let go of that I cannot change, right? And this is something that is so powerful, because when you stop banging your head against a brick wall, trying to change something that just won't, right? You're not getting anywhere, but you're not also serving yourself. Okay? What avoidance or escape strategies can I use for now until I solve this issue? Can I escape or avoid the situation? What can I do? And then it could just be, maybe I need to forgive and let go of something that I've been holding on to for a long time. It was really interesting. In one of my workshops, there was this older gentleman, and he was, very quiet, but he seemed like a very sort of angry person, and didn't talk much. But after this particular workshop that we talked about forgiveness and letting go, and he came back the next week and he said, you know what, guys, I forgave this one guy in grade 5, and I stopped seeking retaliation. And I feel like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders, because this man had been thinking from that moment that his friend in grade 5 hurt him, how he was going to hurt him the next time he saw him. And I'm telling you guys, this was like 5 or 6 decades that he's been holding on to this. And he finally let it go. And just the feeling of letting that go, he said, was incredible. He says, I have a lot to go, but just letting that one thing go, just stopping seeking retaliation of that one kid in grade 5, he said, was a huge weight off his shoulders, and his demeanor changed. So, even if it's a small thing, it can make a huge difference in how you're going to cope with the rest of your, with the rest of your boxes that you're holding on to on your heart. So remembering that when we change our thoughts, we can change our world, right? Thinking about how you think, why you think, how you've talked yourself into thinking, how you were brought up. Change your thoughts and change your world. It really can make a difference in a lot of different things. So just sometimes even stopping and thinking about your thoughts is really, really important. So I'm going to try this video clip. If it doesn't work right away, it's a minute and a half. Don't leave, because I tried. If not, just hold on. This is a really, really great video. Let me just give it a try. We'll see how it goes. Okay, fingers crossed, everybody. All right, guys. That didn't work. I tried. Um, I will send you the link instead, or it's called "Getting Through um, Getting Through a Crap Week." Oops, Getting Through a Crap Week with Dr. Mike Evans, and it's really great. That's a really great video. Oops, I don't know how to get rid of this now. Close. Perfect. Okay, that's unfortunate. I tried. Oh well. It's really about sticking to the basics, right? When you're having a bad day, when you're having a bad week, think about what it is that you're not doing or what you're forgetting to do. Are you forgetting to eat? Are you forgetting to exercise? Are you not reaching out to people? What can you do to change your circumstance? And it's really sometimes just about changing your perception, right? So that kind of brings us to the end of this particular chill out series. But let's talk about what we've discussed, right? The first week we talked about the definition of anger and what it was, and we found out that it was an emotion, an important emotion, and that it was important to have because it was telling us that there was a problem that needed to be solved. The week after that, we talked about anger and stress and mental health and how they're linked, and how when we don't manage our stress and our stress is high, then anger becomes an emotion of choice, then our mental health might be affected. We talked about trigger thoughts and coping thoughts, and how it's important to think about what's triggering us and why are we seeing it that way. What story are we telling ourselves, and is there a way that we can change it? Coping thoughts. What can I do to change the situation? We just talked about forgiveness, right? And how to let things go. And it doesn't mean that it's okay. It doesn't mean that the other person, didn't do something wrong. It just means that you're not letting it affect you anymore because you cannot change it. The next thing we talked about failure, right? A single incident or short duration, which is a lapse, right? Not a failure. It's not a failure. It's a lapse, sorry. It just means that we learn from it. So how to prevent relapse, right? By doing our coping strategies. So this is where we have to, I'm just going to put it back for a second there. Think about all the different things that we learned and how we're going to put them in use for us, how we're going to, make it work for us, and how we're going to find a coping strategy that works for us, and how we're going to start getting into our stress management, and how we're going to start taking care of ourselves, because that's what's important. We're the only ones who can do that. So just as a closure here, the greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another. And it is very important when you think about our minds are so powerful that we can choose how we think or what to think. And we can also, help other people, but also change a situation in our life just based on how we see it, and change our happiness just based on how we see it, right? Based on what we do about it and what we decide to choose to let go of. And I want to, let you know that if there's anything that you need help with, if you need to call, or all of these different resources are always available for people who need help, or just, reaching out to a friend, or reaching out to any resource that you might have in your community, in your, family, in your circle, in your, whether it's, any type of faith that you have, or any type of, if it's going to the gym, if it's doing yoga, if it's, again, breathing or whatever, but finding people to connect with so that you can kind of get help with moving forward in this particular situation. So that kind of takes us to the end of our workshop. I'm going to, again, just send out these polls for you. And then we can have any questions and see how, or if there's any questions that you wanted to ask, or we could move on to the next, move on to the rest of our day. All right. So there we go. And the next one, of course, is this one here. How satisfied are you with the Demio platform? Perfect. Excellent. All right. Well, this sort of concludes our 4 sessions. I really want to thank you for participating and being part of the 4 sessions. It really, really makes me happy. I hope that you were able to get something from it and that you were able to take something home with you, knowing that I'll be teaching a lot more workshops as the weeks go by. Next Wednesday, I'll be teaching a workshop just on the personal power grid. So if you're still having challenges with the mastery quadrant and the acceptance quadrant, then come join me on Wednesday. Just go to either Facebook or the CAF Connection, the webinars. Then you're welcome to sign up for that particular one, or there's lots of other ones happening nationally with the CAF with the CAF. So if you have any questions, now's a good time. Otherwise, I will let you go and enjoy the rest of your day. And I hope to talk to you and chat to you soon. All right, so I'm here. I've got some time to listen to questions if you have any. Oh, you are so welcome. I am so pleased. This is my favorite topic. So anytime, I'm really happy. You're very welcome. And remembering that you can go back and listen to them in an hour, they're posted onto the CAF Connection website. All right. So if there's no other questions, I will sort of let you go and have a great day. And I hope that you enjoy the summer, right? For us, schools end on Thursday. So here we go to another 9 weeks of doing stuff with your kids if anything's open. So good luck with that. And have a great Friday. All right. All right, so if there's no other questions, I will catch you guys later. Thank you so much. Have a great day.